break it down. Pivot tables, hallelujah. Bar charts, hallelujah. Goal seek, hallelujah. Cause Excel Funk's gonna give it to you. Cause Excel Funk's gonna give it to you. Cause Excel Funk's gonna give it to you. Just stop the lines and stop the clocks. Don't believe me, just watch.
In our previous video, we were talking about measures of center, and we talked about using the built-in functions to do some calculations. In this video, we're going to talk about measures of variation. Now, the easiest measure of variation is the range, and the range is simply equal to, I'll write it over here, the max minus the min. Now, there is not a built-in function in Excel, so we're just going to calculate it by typing in equals, click on the maximum value, minus, click on the minimum value. So our range in this case is 0.0366, we'll say. And what does that mean? Well, there's 0.0366 difference between the max and the min. All our values range in that difference, okay? This is not the best measure of variation. The best measures of variation, and the ones that we use most often, is we talk about the variance and standard deviation. And the variance and standard deviation, if you look at the formulas, are based on the mean. And what they calculate is how far from the mean every single observation is. So when we are calculating the variance, we take the observation minus the mean. Observation minus the mean. Notice in this case, if I take this value minus the mean, I'm going to get a negative value. And here I'd get a positive. If I simply took those values and added them all up, I would end up with 0. And that would not tell me anything. So the way the formula works is we take the value minus the mean and then we square it. And the reason we square it is so that we don't end up with any negative numbers. And then because we've squared everything, we have to adjust it back by dividing. All right, I'm not going to give you the exact formula here because Excel has the built-in functions. To calculate the variance, the one I just described, it's VAR. To calculate the standard deviation, it is STDEV. Okay. All right, so let's calculate the variance of our data set. So I'm going to type in equals, and I actually typed that wrong. It should be equals VAR, open parentheses. Now, I'm going to caution you here. There is a .P for population and a .S for sample. You're okay if you use the .P, but I'm going to advise you to just use VAR. Don't worry about the .P and the .S. If you use .S, you will not get it correct. There is an adjustment factor. So I would like you to use VAR, no dots at all. So just type in equals VAR, highlight your data, and then close parentheses. And it will return the variance. And for the standard deviation, is equal STDEV, open parentheses, highlight your data. Yes, you can highlight from the bottom up, same difference, close parentheses, and there's our standard deviation. Now I want to tell you now the relationship between the variance and the standard deviation. The standard deviation is equal to the square root of the variance. Okay. Now, just to show you that, in Excel, if you want to take the square root, you can type in equals, and our key is SQRT, open parentheses. And Excel will take the square root of the value. So you're going to take the square root of the variance, and you will see that they are equal. So standard deviation is the square root of the variance. And for that reason, the variance is the standard deviation squared. Okay, what do we mean that? The standard deviation multiplied by itself, or raised to the second power. So I can take equals standard deviation. And the way we do an exponent in Excel is the caret key. It is a triangle missing its bottom, located above the number 6 on your keyboard, and we call that the caret key. And then I put my exponent squared. In other words, it's going to take the 0.0168 times 0.0168. Right? And now notice that that gave me back the variance. So if I know the variance, I can calculate the standard deviation by taking the square root. If I know the standard deviation, I can calculate the variance by squaring it. All right, so if you know one, you can calculate the other. In Excel, though, there's built-in functions for both, and so I would probably advise calculating both just so you don't make an error. In other words, if I messed up the standard deviation and I calculate the variance from that messed up number, I will get that wrong as well. All right, the last measure of variation that I'm going to tell you is the coefficient of variation, and that is equal to our standard deviation divided by our mean and then times 100. It is actually a percent, okay? And so when we represent it, we always put the percent sign. That's why we multiply by 100. There is not a built-in function here in Excel, but notice that if we calculate all these other things, we can calculate the coefficient of variation simply by clicking on the values. So I'm going to type in equals, click on my standard deviation, use divided by, click on my mean, and then times 100. Now I don't have to worry about order of operations here because it's multiply and divide, so it will go in order. This divided by this times this, and we're safe. So I get a coefficient of variation of 3.43%. Okay. Now the coefficient of variation is not our best measure of center, but it is very useful when I want to compare variation between two extreme things. For example, if I had the average daily gain of turkeys and the average daily gain of elephants, the average daily gain of elephants would be a lot more than the average daily gain of turkeys. If I wanted to compare their variation, I could use it by using the coefficient of variation, because notice that the coefficient of variation adjusts based on the mean. So if the mean is larger, it's going to make it smaller. If the mean is smaller, it's going to make it larger, and therefore we can compare turkeys and elephants, so to speak. So that is why our coefficient of variation is useful. All right, I hope this video helps. If you have questions, please let me know.
Excel funk's gonna give it to you.